Officer for Atlanta Housing. With more than 20 years of experience and service helping to house residents of all backgrounds and income levels across the Southeast, Terry is one of the nation's most trusted and sought-after experts in public policy and housing affordability. Prior to taking the helm of Georgia's largest public housing authority, Terry served as Chief Operating Officer for Atlanta Housing, following her distinguished appointment as the City of Atlanta's first Chief Housing Officer. Terry is a proud HBCU graduate and holds a Bachelor of Arts in Public Administration from Grambling State University and a Master of Public Policy and Administration from Jackson State University. Terry is a lifelong member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, which is a public service organization. Terry, we're lucky to have you as a member of the club. Please come up to the stage and introduce our panelists.
Thank you, President Adrian. Good morning. Well, good afternoon now. Again, my name is Terry Lee, and I am so proud for the privilege to serve as the President and Chief Executive Officer of Atlanta Housing. I believe we have the opportunity to have a conversation today that will not just be informative, but insightful. And it's really about Atlanta and who do we want to be as we continue to grow up. When you think about affordable housing is not just for them, but it's quite honestly the stabilizing force of our community. And I am so grateful to have 3 lifelong Atlantans, as well as individuals who have labored in this work to join this conversation today. We will have Sarah Kirsch, who serves as the Vice Chair of Atlanta Housing Board of Commissioners. We can clap for that one. As well as the Managing Director of the Housing Fund for the Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta. Sarah has spent the majority of her career really looking at these issues that impact real estate and how communities actually grow responsibly as well as in an equitable fashion. We also have with us John Almond. John Almond is the President and CEO of the Westside Future Fund. Prior to becoming the CEO of Westside Future Fund, John spent time with Atlanta Committee for Progress. John has not just invested himself into place-based strategies, but he's actually become a resident of the community which he serves because he believes service among self is actually the principle that he should live every day. And last but definitely not least, we'll be joined by Courtney English, who is the Chief Policy Advisor for our Mayor, Mayor Andre Dickens. Courtney is responsible for leading the charge of how do we make Atlanta better, looking at it from not just a housing perspective, but education for our youth, economic mobility, and quite honestly, youth development overall. Courtney, we're grateful to have you here. He is the youngest elected official in the history of the City of Atlanta, serving on the Atlanta School Board, but also serving as the former chair of the Atlanta Public Schools. So with that, please give a round of applause for our panel. If you would, please join me on the stage. As our panel joins us, I would also like to thank the club itself for giving me this opportunity, but also my co-chairs, Harry Sitterford and David Romer. David is in New Zealand and probably having a little bit more fun than us today, but I can guarantee you he will miss this conversation. Thank you.
So what's interesting is that I have the mic. I believe I talk to Sarah and Courtney probably on a weekly basis, and I run from John weekly because I never know if John is looking for additional subsidy. But I'll tell you, what strikes me as we start this conversation is our mayor was here a few months ago. He talked about Atlanta and the challenges we have, but also the opportunities we have as a city. And so with that, Courtney, I would like to start with you. You have been entrusted with the responsibility of leading the mayor's housing strategy. And we all know that means including the creation and preservation of 20,000 units of affordable housing over the course of his 2 terms. What's working here? Are we getting it right, or are there things we should be doing differently? Why is it even important?
Yeah, so thank you, Terry, for your leadership, both in the City of Atlanta, at Atlanta Housing, in Rotary, so on and so forth. We really do follow your lead. Terry Lee is an absolute rock star. So give her a round of applause. long and short of it is, we do think we are well on our way of achieving the mayor's ambitious goal of building and preserving 20,000 units of affordable housing in an 8-year period. We've done that through a variety of means. We take a whole of government approach to building affordable housing because we believe that affordable housing is a crisis not just in the city of Atlanta but across the country. And the lack of housing leads to inequity. We can talk a little bit more about what that means for our city and for cities across the country in a second. But what we've tried to do is a few things. One, we put everybody in the room who touches housing. How about that, right? Collaboration. So whether you are Atlanta Housing, the Community Foundation, the West Side Future Fund, whether you're the Atlanta Land Bank, Atlanta Land Trust, MARTA, APS, whether you are Invest Atlanta, Luisa's here in the room. If you touch dirt and you are a public or quasi-public organization, we are all sitting in a room for the first time ever planning together, trying to figure out the best, fastest way to get deals done. The Atlanta Beltline is in the room. I see Clyde over there. Everybody anywhere is going in the same direction because our mayor would say that Atlanta is a group project. And so the best example of that is our ability to get housing out of the ground. In a 3-year period, we have developed or delivered 6,500 units of affordable housing, with another 4,500 units of housing on the way. To put that in perspective, that's more housing per capita than any other city in the country over that same year period, right? And so we're doing it through collaboration. We're doing it through creative partnerships with folks like Sarah, who's managing the largest private housing fund in the history of the city, in the city of Atlanta. We're doing it by going after bad landlords who are keeping people in deplorable conditions. We're doing it by adding additional money. We're doing it by building housing wherever we have publicly owned land. We'll build housing in a parking lot. We'll turn an office building into housing. We'll turn a fire station into housing. And if you got dirt in your backyard, you can put housing in it.
Thank you, Courtney. So with that, Sarah, for so long, the philanthropic community has been absent from the conversation, and your leadership has galvanized community in a way that has not been seen before. Why is that important, and what actually is the value that the philanthropic community can bring to the affordable housing conversation?
Thanks, Terry. It's great to be with this esteemed panel in this wonderful room. The philanthropic sector has been instrumental in achieving the goals and the progress that Courtney was referring to. For so long, Atlanta lacked flexible local funding. And that was one of those linchpin issues that you just couldn't get projects across the finish line. And we knew that we needed more capital, more flexible capital, to achieve our community's goals, to hit the mayor's 20,000 unit vision. But we also recognize that there's no way we're going to grant our way out of this problem, right? There is not enough grant capital in the world to meet the needs for housing. Affordable housing is unique in that it is a revenue generating asset, right? This is not something that is simply giving money away. It is funding that you can invest, you can get your money back, and you can get a return on your investment to the tune of kind of bond-like returns, all by the way, by providing a really meaningful community benefit. And that's been a real culture shift in the philanthropic sector here. The Community Foundation itself has invested $5 million of its own corpus in our affordable housing funds. That's a different tool in the toolbox than we've had in the past. We've seen a lot of other foundations really look at their portfolio and say, how can we take the resources that we have, invest differently, and really help come together to solve this really critical community need? So that's been a real difference maker. Lots of folks in this room can attest that there are lots of cities across the country that are losing tax credit deals, are losing new markets deals, can't get projects across the finish line because they don't have local flexible funding. So that's just been tremendous leadership by the philanthropic sector. I'd say the other big difference is that for those in the room who live and breathe housing, you'll remember there was a day that I think it was an above the fold article in the Business Chronicle that said there's only one city with affordable housing remaining in the state of Georgia, and it was Warner Robins. And it was one of those sort of wake-up call moments that this is a statewide issue.
that this is something that's impacting Savannah and Augusta and Columbus and really every community across the state. And that's been a real shift, that the philanthropic sector from across the state has come together and say, what can we do collectively? How can we advocate at a state level for different solutions? And y'all, sometimes that just means allowing local communities to come up with their own solutions. It doesn't mean we're having necessarily a top-down approach to housing. It's really allowing local communities, whether that's the city of Atlanta or whether that's where we're building the latest battery factory somewhere across the state, to come up with their own housing solutions in a way that works for that community. And the philanthropic sector has been really instrumental in sort of organizing that effort on a statewide level.
Thank you so much, Sarah. John, I remember a few years ago you had me walk along the belt line of the West Side Trail, and John did that because he wanted me to see the heartbeat of the West Side Trail within Vine City and English Avenue. But what really struck me is that for the last 9 years, you've labored in that community, really focused on place-based strategies. Tell us why that's important, specifically in lifting up affordable housing for the residents that currently stay there.
No, thank you. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate the opportunity on this panel. So we got the questions in advance, and I was thinking about this question about affordability in context of a place-based initiative, but I want to answer this from the perspective of my own lived experience in Atlanta. So I was born in Atlanta. I graduated from Bedell High School in 1983. I graduated from Emory University in 1987. And when I was coming of age, the neighborhoods on the east side of Atlanta were in a very, very different position. Like the Druid Hills of today did not look like the Druid Hills when I was growing up. Morningside, East Lake. No one at that particular point in time, not that I was studying like him today, but because at that particular point in time, the city of Atlanta was depopulating. Folks were not really thinking about affordable housing as a top tier issue. Fast forward to today, in the context of answering the question from a place-based perspective, I'll answer from the perspective of the place being the West Side. And one of the things that's so dramatically shifting is Atlanta repopulating, and repopulating, fairly quickly. The neighborhoods on the West Side, going back, 30, 40 years, were fully populated, kind of for the wrong reasons as mixed-income community because of segregation and Jim Crow. But depopulated, so there's a lot of vacant, open land on the West Side, which you saw on that tour. As we think about affordable housing in the context of the West Side, I'd really like folks to think about here is investing in affordable housing is one of the best ways we can address the economic mobility problem we have in our city. Why is that? What will come later, one of the best ways you can address economic mobility is people live in a thriving, mixed-income neighborhood. So living in Morningside means you're likely to have great life outcomes in Morningside of today. You can't go do affordability in the Morningside of today. Politically, much less, how much it would cost to do affordability. So part of the place-based strategy, really thinking long-term, right? And affordability is buying land now, ensuring local residents can afford to stay in that land, but also fully anticipating that the community is going to become mixed income. And so part of the place-based approach is a window in time we have now, especially Atlanta's West Side, is that, for example, the land in median home value in East Lake now is close to $500,000. It was not at all that way 30 years ago. In fact, I see Egbert Perry earlier when some of the early work got started in East Lake. Median home value right now in Vine City English Avenue is around $200,000. So the affordability really can be an investment in our future prosperity by ensuring we lock down that affordability now before it gets too expensive. So the affordability on the West Side is so important because 10, 15 years from now, it'll be too cost prohibitive to undertake.
So, John, you bring up a great point, and today's title was How Affordable Housing Strengthens Atlanta for All of Us, not just some of us. But what strikes me is that as Rotarians, again, we have the opportunity to do service and lift up our communities differently. But Sarah, why should we care? Why is this important for this group to care about this topic?
So I often say that housing is foundational to everything that we care about. And it sounds like the mayor shared that vision, best place to raise a child. But I would guess if there is anything that you tell me that you care about, I can tell you how safe, stable, affordable housing makes that thing easier. And I saw Margie somewhere in the room. If you care about educational outcomes for our kids, you better care about safe, stable, affordable housing. Because a kid moves once in a year and their scores drop 20%, they move twice in a year, God forbid 3 times, they might as well not go to school that year. You care about economic mobility, which, you know, we have the distinction of now being 50 out of 50 in economic mobility. You better care about people not spending more than 50% of their income on housing. Because when you are spending 50% of your income on housing, you're not investing in professional development, much less having enough for healthcare and other needs. You care about healthcare, you need well-located, safe, stable, affordable housing. You care about homelessness, and every expert will tell you, whether or not you are politically one way or another, the single greatest issue that is driving homelessness across the country is lack of housing. You know, any statisticians in the room, you do that regression analysis of, you know, what's the thing that's driving it? And it is just this cross-cutting foundational issue for our community. But I'll tell you why I care about it and why I've invested so much of my personal time and professional life in it. And it's because housing sits in that nexus of something that makes a really big difference. And by the way, we can actually do something about it, right? It is sticks, bricks, land, labor, and it's something that in a very real period of time, you can move the needle. And I don't know, there are a lot of other issues where you can, you know, put a stake in the ground and say, we know we're making a difference. We can count those units. We can track those family outcomes. And, you know, I think that's our purpose.
Thank you. So Sarah, you laid out a wonderful business case for why housing is important, and more importantly, affordable housing. So Courtney, I would shift to you. It just makes sense, right, for us to invest in affordable housing, for us to lift up housing affordability for our residents. But what's holding us back? What are some of the biggest barriers that's keeping Atlanta from solving this problem?
There are a few. One is money, right? To build this stuff, it costs a whole heck of a lot of money, 20,000 units. Actually, so when we started, let me say it this way, when we started in the mayor's office in 2022, the cost of a multifamily unit was around $340,000. That number's way, way higher. It's about $412,000 or so. Mark's in the room can check me on. It's a whole lot of Amy can probably tell me better, but it's way, way higher. The point I'm getting at is that that's about 20,000 units over 8 years times 350. That's a $6 billion problem, right? That's a $6 billion problem. And so some way we have to find that amount of money to create that units. 60% of it is going to come from private debt or equity. Government's going to chip in where we can, subsidy, hopefully makes up for the gap. So one is money, right? Just pure and simple. The other one is political will. John said something earlier that actually struck me. I've never heard you say it, but you said, you know, if you wanted to build affordable housing in Morningside, it would be difficult. And he said money, one, but also two. What did he say? Anybody remember? Politics. Think about that. Think about that. Why should that be a hard thing to do? If affordability, for all the reasons that Sarah just articulated, is so vital to you as an individual, to us as a health of the city, it is incredibly difficult to get affordable housing done in communities throughout the city because, candidly, people don't want them. And there's a variety of reasons for that. There's some folks who don't want to mess up the quote-unquote character of their neighborhood. There's some folks who candidly just don't want certain people who they think are attracted to affordable housing living in their neighborhood. There are other individuals for a variety of reasons who just have made the decision that not in my backyard, folks, right? And so I'm just opposed to anything new on whether it's transit, or whether it's housing, whether it's green space, I don't want it, right? And so we got to be honest about that issue if we want to face it. Here's what this conversation about inequality means over time in the city of Atlanta and across the country. If we don't solve for affordability, We don't solve for our economic inequality gaps. We have one of three choices, and these are real things that are playing out in the city and across this country. Either A, because the bulk of your buyers are in the middle class. When you shrink the middle class, you create pockets of haves and pockets of have-nots. Well, if you do that long enough over time, your economy becomes unsustainable, and then the bottom falls out. That city is called Detroit, right? There's another option that we're seeing playing out, right? Pockets of haves, pockets of have-nots, and the pockets of have-nots, you have 600 murders a year. That city's called Chicago. The third option is you just price everybody out of the city. That city's called San Francisco. And so really the affordable housing conversation is an identity conversation for the city of Atlanta. Who do we want to be? Who do we want to be? And you know, I read somewhere that Atlanta was a city too busy to hate. I want us to be true to what we said on paper.
So keeping with that theme of Atlanta being a city too busy to hate, what can the corporate community do? And now, John, I'll actually ask you this question. What can the corporate community do to actually support affordable housing and even expedite our efforts?
Well, I'll give an example right out of the Westside Future Fund and what the corporate community can do. We are very, very fortunate at the Westside Future Fund to have an investment fund backed by 10 Atlanta corporations. And I see some of them here today, so I'm going to note the names as the Coca-Cola Company, the Home Depot, Delta Airlines, Chick-fil-A, Cox Enterprise, ICE, Georgia Power, Southern Company, Equifax, Holder Construction, and Truist. I was out for the name because I could remember, I don't know which one, but those 10 Atlanta corporations going back committed to, it's a for-profit investment fund where they want a return of their capital, this is very important, but not on their capital. So make no money on their money. Stays on their books as an investment. We, the Westside Future Fund, as a non-for-profit, manage that fund. It shows up to us as low-cost loans. So low-cost loan as in 2% interest only. So those low-cost loans from these 10 Atlanta corporations have enabled us to purchase nearly $30 million worth of vacant blighted land in English Avenue, Vine City. And it was critical because, as Courtney would say, a lot of the city's gating is they can't go above appraised value. Many of the investors on the west side are not going to sell at appraised value. So it enabled us to buy quick. It provides cheap construction financing and financing. It's a 30-year fund. We've nearly called in $102 million of it. But what's also really important to these 10 Atlanta corporations who wanted to do right by their company. I see Kathy Weller was the chief financial officer of Coca-Cola put together. I'll never forget a meeting. We had the Coca-Cola when we were putting the fund together. They said, losing the money, we don't want to lose it, but a much more significant issue to us is reputation. Meaning a bad headline, right? They would be out because these consumer-facing companies this is not their business. Their show would be like, you're doing what? And so the other part, because we're overwhelmingly funded with philanthropic support from corporate and other independent foundations, is to ensure we're doing right by the community on the west side. Because the initial concern when we stood up this fund is we're going to gentrify everyone right out of the community. And so the other part where corporate Atlanta has played such a role is leading, ensuring an approach that ensures community residents and those that ties to the community go first. But it was a great example of innovative corporate leadership willing to do something unique to Atlanta. And I know that those kind of examples, building, I know the work you're doing at the Community Foundation has some of that as well. So just to give one example of how corporate lens really help address affordability in our city.
Thank you, John. If there are any questions from our audience, if you start lining up, we'll ask our panelists a few more questions. And so, Courtney, you talked about Detroit, San Francisco, and Chicago. Well, what is one thing that Atlanta can do to be bold and innovative in this space that no other city is doing?
Well, I think, we've got to keep pushing and be relentless about pursuing the goal. And so the collaboration was low-hanging fruit, and the mayor created what's called the Affordable Housing Strike Force, and that's that group where everybody I named previously sits in a room we're trying to get housing out of the ground. I think when we move forward, we've got to apply more resources to the housing issue. I talked about the cost of building housing, and the cost of capital isn't doing us any favors right now. We need a dedicated, long-term, sustainable funding source for affordable housing. So we created, under the leadership of Sarah and Terry and a few others in this room, we created the Affordable Housing Beloved Trust Fund, right? But it's really just siphoning off from the general fund. It's about 2% of the general fund. We need a dedicated tax, penny, fee, or some sort that says this fund is going to last in perpetuity, so that we have enough resources to be able to provide for housing. Thirdly, we got to increase our ability to deregulate. We got to go faster in terms of permitting. We got to go faster in terms of zoning. We got to go faster in terms of our ability to provide for infrastructure to get housing out of the ground faster. Fourth, I think we've got to be more creative and candidly more flexible, which requires political will both from our end, but political will from folks in this audience that say, hey, look, density isn't a bad thing. We want more of it because density allows us to buy more, it allows us to attract amenities, it allows us to create mixed income communities. And so we got to do all of those things in an effort to get housing out of the ground faster. Again, we've got to, we're gonna do those things and take really, really bold steps.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Yes, please.
Thanks so much, all of you, for your work on this very important issue. Martha Brooks, and I just have a question about the big picture. You've talked about philanthropic funding, you've talked about a government, perhaps tax, to generate some more funds, you've talked about the corporate fund. What is the big picture of, as they call it, the capital stack? I'm sure you have a vision of where the $6 billion is coming from, or maybe you even want to break it down to the next 2 years worth or something, but can somebody give me a full picture of the capital? What is coming from regular banking? What is a grant? What is free capital? What is rent fees from the people who are living there? What's it all look like?
Absolutely, thank you, Sarah.
Sure. So, you still have sort of your traditional players in putting together the capital stack. You're going to have equity that is maybe the sponsor's equity that they're putting in 10%. Sometimes that equity may be public grants, but that's a big important piece of the capital stack. You're going to have traditional lenders, your construction lender, all of the financial institutions in the room, we rely heavily on that traditional lender. In order to be able to build it and operate something affordably, you generally are going to need some source of concessionary capital, meaning capital that's not looking for purely market rate returns. That can come in the form of a loan from Invest Atlanta. Eloisa was mentioned earlier. It can come in the form of loans from us. A lot of times, these deals have all of the above in terms of layering. So Leonard Adams over here. It is layering in every capital source imaginable, particularly to serve the lowest levels of affordability. So for instance, we're investing an average of $30,000 per affordable home, and that is to cover a cost that may range from $150,000 per unit to preserve existing affordability, for new construction all the way north of $400,000 per unit. So you're thinking about how you're layering all of that on. And we're going to be a very small piece of that stack, but being concessionary allows appropriate returns to other investors, and while getting the project across the finish line. It is unnecessarily complex often, right? I mean, it is very challenging to get deals done, and to the regulatory environment piece, 95% of housing in this country is built by the private sector without subsidy. And so to find a path out of this, we do need to have these regular sources of funding so that, all the way from mom and pop builders up to our larger, more institutional builders can deliver affordably to meet the demand.
Also, wanted to say one of my learnings when I started Westside Future Fund, the overwhelming orders of magnitude funder of affordable housing is the federal government via the Land Housing Authority, primarily also through tax credits. But imagine to this region if Hartsfield-Jackson started operating at a half rate, what it would mean, right? if there, given the dependencies that occur, if there are freezes or significant cuts in federal funding for affordable housing, it will have devastating consequences. Because of the dependence. That's one thing I didn't fully appreciate, is how much we're dependent upon federal government to supply, subsidy for affordable housing.
Thank you, John. Yes, please.
This may be more appropriate, I guess, for a homelessness conversation, but how does mental illness fit into the whole idea of affordable housing that has to be, maybe has to be addressed at the same time as affordable housing?
Yeah, just it's certainly an issue with our shelter population. We launched a rapid housing initiative in partnership with folks like Chris Womack, where we are trying to house every single homeless person in downtown Atlanta by the end of the year. Homes, mental health, and addiction are major issues. We do take a housing-first approach, though, which ultimately means that you have to put a person somewhere with a stable roof over their heads before you can even deal with mental health or addiction. And unless you have that roof, trying to solve for a mental health issue with somebody at the tent who's going to be in two different places throughout the course of the week is almost impossible. And so our goal, again, is to put people in housing as fast as humanly possible and then deal with the other issues that make us themselves.
Yes, Bruce.
Thank you, Terry. Bruce Gunter, beat up old veteran of the affordable housing wars over the years. I want to ask a question about the big idea. First, I need to make an observation. As you guys have attested to, I observe after my several decades, there's more public investment than ever before. There's more development activity than ever before. Atlanta housing is going full steam. And there's more, importantly, the more civic and political support than ever before for affordable housing. But y'all know we're losing ground. And that's one simple reason, is we are in a strong economy, and there's an equal and opposite negative impact on affordable housing once our neighborhoods are gentrifying and there are new companies moving in. So my question is, and if you had a magic wand, and I know there's no one magic bullet, but if you had one, what really big idea, Courtney, you used the B word, I'm very grateful for that, because we need to think in those terms. What big idea would you try to institute? Is it inclusionary zoning citywide? Is it seeing affordable housing as a public good, infrastructure to be put in first by housing like the Beltline has been doing? Tackling the regulatory regime so that the private sector can invade more and invest more in affordable housing? What big idea might you have?
So one is, for me, is absolutely expanding inclusionary zoning citywide. Inclusionary zoning has been the most effective tool that we have to generate affordable housing outside of what Atlanta Housing does, and outside of the low-income tax credit program, which generates millions of units of affordability in a given year. Inclusionary zoning mandates that a certain number of units are built in a given development, usually around certain areas of Beltline and on the west side. We need it citywide, and we need to tie it to projects that have public subsidy. So if you don't get some public dollars in your thing, we're going to mandate affordability, mandate that you put affordability in your thing. Second thing I would say is we have to deregulate. Now, here's where it gets a little uncomfortable, because deregulation not only means we have to make permits go faster. We need absolutely to make permits go faster. We need to make zoning go faster. We need more by right areas. The city's in the process of rewriting the zoning code. Zoning takes, I don't know, how long does zoning take? 6 to 9 months? Yeah, okay. Yeah, 6 to 9 months. If you deregulate the permitting process and make the zoning go faster, what you are doing, I think to your point, Bruce, is you're creating an incentive for the market to do affordability. Now, I don't think it should be for everywhere. What we should say is, hey, if you put affordability into your project, here's the affordable housing fast pass for permitting and for zoning. What that will ultimately do, we talk about building 20,000 units in 8 years. There are 20,000 market rate units in development in the city right now. There'll be 20,000 market rate units built by the end of 2025, and then there'll be another 20,000 units built next year. The question is, how do we tap into those market rate units to get affordability in them? And one way of doing that is through deregulation and incentivizing the market to build more affordable housing.
I just offer dedicated funding source. We need more sponsors developing more affordable housing, either as part of their market rate deal. But definition of insanity is to plan your business around an unreliable funding source, right? Anyone in the room want to raise their hand for that opportunity? So if we want people to scale and we want people to do more, we need a dedicated funding source. I also, your point on infrastructure, you know, when we invest in transportation, we often require that a community have a housing plan associated with that transportation investment. But there are no teeth to it. No one says you can't have that transportation funding if you don't actually commit to build housing for the full workforce that's going to live there. And so we're incentivizing traffic. We're incentivizing lack of mixed income communities. So I think that point that you made of making it infrastructure can be really tactical in how we are thinking about how we invest in infrastructure and what's required to receive funding.
And the only thing I would add, we talk a lot about affordable housing, but we really forget that it's a people issue at the same time. And so if you just think about it, affordable housing really is what housing costs versus what people can actually afford. And so we focus also on the economic mobility conditions of our residents that actually need affordable housing, focus on workforce development, educational attainment, and for people, it would take some reliance off public sources needed to help subsidize housing.
Eddie, we have time for one more question.
Eddie Benoit, you guys have done a great job stimulating affordable housing between the city of Atlanta Housing with developers. You mentioned some of the threats and the roadblocks you have to overcome related to politics and NIMBYism and all that. But with the rising insurance costs related to liability insurance, how do you see that impacting your ability to move forward with the additional 10,000 units within the city as you work with developers like ourselves? Because every affordable housing project, whether it's here in Atlanta or throughout the nation, is somewhat redlined because of the fact that it's affordable housing and therefore the insurance cost is through the roof. So how do you see that being somewhat of a threat to what you're trying to accomplish at the city?
I think we're out of time.
Nice, Eddie. Finally, someone called me.
Yeah, I have no comment. But we will have comment later.
Anybody? Terry?
I echo Courtney on this. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the rising costs actually prohibit the ability for us to provide affordable housing. John said something that I wasn't going to talk about, and Maria, I'm not going to answer a question about this. But when you think about Atlanta housing and our ability to provide resources to incentivize the private market to provide affordability, we are largely dependent upon federal funds. Those federal funds go into capital stack and they operate in sub-state. They also help subsidize some of those insurance costs. So if we're paying more money on the side of insurance, then we're having less to be able to actually house somebody. So it definitely is creating a huge concern. And it also creates a concern for me when I just think about the dwindling federal resources we have.
Good question, Eddie. Before we thank Terry and our panelists, I want to call out some upcoming programs. On March the 24th, we'll be tackling the police training center that the mayor talked to us about. We are going to pivot hard at the end of March to talk with the music director of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, Natalie Stutzman. Don't forget Rotary on the Road down at Trilith Studios. Please find a Rotarian that you don't know well and perhaps carpool and spend some time together engaging. I'm also pleased, Harry, if you don't mind me announcing, that Senator Warnock is going to be coming to Rotary in March to talk about an unusually calm and quiet Washington, D.C. And then something we're very excited about, we are close to securing Brian Stevenson coming to speak to the club. So that issue around recidivism is something else the mayor challenged us about, and Bernice King is working hard to bring him to our club, so hopefully that'll be a good way to end our year. Terry, thank you for your leadership in our community. Thank you for putting this panel together. John, Sarah, Courtney. It's hard to believe that Harry and Doug have been Rotarians longer than you and I have been alive. up the great work. Send Mayor Andre our best wishes. And Harry and Doug, here's to another 60 years. Thank you very much.